The Vorkai fleet had not lost a battle in 600 years, 600 years of expansion, 600 years of burning colonies and cracking open planets like eggs, 600 years of every species in the known galaxy learning one simple fact. When the Vorkai came, you either surrendered or you became debris. They were not cruel. Cruelty implied emotion. The Vorkai were simply efficient. They moved through star systems the way fire moved through dry wood, not because they hated the wood, but because wood burned and fire spread, and that was simply the nature of things. Fleet Commander Zethrak V stood at the observation deck of the Eternal Dominion, watching the star system called Sol-adjacent Sector 7 spread out below him like a broken necklace. 14 planets, 3 inhabited. The third one, a blue-green rock, had been logged as a protected research observation zone for the last 40 years. The humans lived there. Zethrak V had read the files. Everyone had read the files. The humans were a Category 3 species, young, aggressive, technologically adolescent, and statistically irrelevant. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 90 years ago. They had a total of 31 warships, most of which were comparable to Vorkai patrol vessels from 3 centuries back. Their largest ship, the Uns Resolute, had a crew of 400 and a weapons array that Zethrak V's analysts described, in their report, as quaint. The Vorkai had come for the mineral deposits in the asteroid belt. The humans had filed 17 formal diplomatic protests over the last 8 years. The Vorkai had not responded to any of them because one did not respond to the complaints of insects. The plan was simple: move in, extract, leave. The humans would either evacuate or not. It did not matter. "Commander," said Navigation Officer Preth, his 4 eyes blinking in the dim blue light of the bridge, "we are entering optimal extraction range. The human defense perimeter is..." He paused. One of his eyes twitched. "The human defense perimeter is offline." Zethrak V turned from the window. "Define offline." "It is not destroyed, Commander. It is simply not broadcasting. Their entire outer sensor grid went dark 14 minutes ago. This was unusual. The humans were, if nothing else, consistent. In all 40 years of observation, they had maintained their little sensor grid like a nervous animal guarding its burrow. It went offline when they ran drills. It went offline during solar interference events. It had never gone offline when a hostile fleet was sitting 3 light minutes away. "A trap," said Weapons Chief Gorak, not as a question. He said everything not as a question. It was a personality defect Zethrak V had long ago stopped trying to correct. "They have 31 ships," Zethrak V said. "We have 400. There is no trap they could construct that would matter." "Then a mistake," said Gorak. "Likely." Zethrak V turned back to the window. "Proceed with approach formation Delta. Standard extraction protocol. If their defense ships attempt engagement, disable and push aside. I don't want to explain to the Council why we destroyed an observation species before the resource extraction was complete." The fleet moved. 400 ships. Not all of them warships. The Vorkai were efficient. So a significant portion of the fleet were transport vessels, mining platforms, automated haulers. But 212 were fully armed warships, ranging from sleek destroyer-class vessels to the 3 massive dreadnoughts that formed the fleet's spine. The Eternal Dominion was one of those dreadnoughts. It was 7 kilometers long. It had been in continuous service for 230 years. It had never taken a hit that required more than minor repair. It moved through the dark between stars the way mountains move through nothing. Because mountains didn't move, and neither, in any meaningful sense, did the Eternal Dominion. 20 minutes into the approach, Sensor Officer Vethis spoke. Her voice was careful in the way that voices got when the speaker was not sure they were reading their instruments correctly. "Commander, I am reading 1 vessel in geosynchronous orbit above the human homeworld. That is expected. They have a shipyard station there." "This is not the shipyard station, Commander. This is a warship." She paused again, longer this time. "I don't recognize the classification." Zethrak V walked to her station. He looked at the sensor readout. The vessel in orbit was big. Not dreadnought big. Not by Vorkai standards. It was perhaps 2 kilometers in length, which for a human ship was extraordinary, but by galactic standards was still relatively modest. What was not modest was its energy signature. Zethrak V had spent his career learning to read energy signatures. They told you everything. Drive type, weapon charge state, shield capacity, power generation class. A Category 3 species energy signatures were recognizable the way a cooking fire was recognizable. Small, hot for their size, contained. This energy signature was not contained. It was the kind of number that appeared on his display when he was looking at the largest warships operated by the Cathali hegemony, who were a Category 8 species with 4,000 years of military development. It was the kind of number that made his analysts pause and double-check their equipment. "Recalibrate sensors," he said. "Already done, Commander." Twice, the energy signature did not change. "What are they charging?" he asked. Vethys's hands moved over her controls. She was good at her job, was thorough and unflappable, and she had served on his bridge for 11 years. Her hands were not quite steady. "I cannot identify the weapon type, Commander. The charge pattern does not match any catalog technology in our database." She looked up at him. 4 eyes, all of them asking the same question. "It doesn't match any technology in the Hegemony's database either," I cross-referenced. The bridge was quiet. In 600 years of Vorkai expansion, this kind of quiet had not happened. Zethrak 5 had read about it in old records, the kind of records they kept about first contacts with genuinely dangerous species, back when the Vorkai were still climbing the ladder. And not the ones holding it. He had read about that quiet. He had never heard it. "Open a channel," he said. The communication officer, young, his scales still pale with inexperience, looked at him with something close to relief. Communication meant talking. Talking meant not whatever the alternative was. "Channel open, Commander." Zethrak 5 straightened. He was a commander of the Vorkai fleet. 600 years of unbroken record. He did not feel fear. He did not allow himself to feel fear, because fear was data and data could be managed, and he was very good at managing data. "Human vessel," he said, in the universal trade tongue that every species above Category 2 was expected to learn. "You are in the approach corridor of Vorkai Fleet Cluster 7. This sector has been designated for resource extraction under Vorkai expansion. Protocol 14. You are advised to stand down and withdraw to a safe distance. This is a courtesy communication. It will not be repeated." The channel hummed. Then a voice came back. It was a human voice. Low, male. The kind of voice that had spent a long time learning how to sound like it was not in a hurry, because people who are not in a hurry have already decided what they're going to do. "Commander Zethrak 5, we know your name. We know your ship. We know your fleet composition, all 412 vessels, including the support craft you're running dark on your port flank. We've been watching you for a while." The channel hummed again. "I'm Captain Elias Vance. This is the Unce Herald of Ruin. I'm going to ask you once to reverse your approach vector and leave this system. I'm not going to explain why. I think you already understand why." Zethrak 5 looked at Vethys. Herald of Ruin was not in any human fleet registry they had on file. It had not existed 40 years ago when observation of the Sol system had begun. It had not existed 10 years ago during the last scheduled intelligence update. It had not existed until now, and the energy signature coming off it had climbed another 20% since they opened the channel, as if the act of speaking had been the last thing it needed before it was ready. "They are targeting us," said Gorak. Still not a question, but the flatness in his voice was different now. Less certainty, something else wearing the costume of certainty. Zethrak 5 looked at the readout. The Herald of Ruin was not targeting them. It was targeting all of them. All 412 ships simultaneously, with a targeting solution that their own fleet computers that had been the most advanced in the known galaxy for 2 centuries, could not have managed with twice the processing time. "How?" said Preth, not to anyone, just to the air. Zethrak 5 did not answer. There was no answer to give that would be useful. He thought about the files. Category 3. 90 years of FTL travel, 31 ships, quaint weapons array. He thought about the 40 years during which the Vorkai had watched the humans, and the humans had, apparently, been watching the Vorkai back. He thought about 17 diplomatic protests that had been ignored. He thought about the word quaint, and then he thought about the particular kind of cleverness that required an intelligent species to look weaker than it was, for a very long time, while something large and patient was being built in a corner of the system, where the observation logs showed nothing but empty space and background. "Radiation," he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. "Calculate reverse approach vector." Preth looked at him. "Sir, you heard me." The bridge was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The first quiet had been the quiet of something unknown. This was the quiet of something understood. Gorak, who said everything not as a question, said, "We are the Vorkai." "Yes," said Zethrak 5, "and that ship is still charging." Nobody said anything else. The calculations ran. Out in the dark, the Herald of Ruin held its position above the small blue-green world, its energy signature sitting at a number that made no sense in the files of any species currently alive to keep files, and it waited to see what 400 ships decided to do next. It waited the way Thing waited when they had already decided, and were simply giving the other party time to catch up. The Vorkai did not retreat. This was not pride. Pride was an emotion, and the Vorkai were efficient. And efficiency did not allow for pride any more than it allowed for fear. This was calculation. You did not move 400 ships backwards because one unidentified vessel had an unusual energy signature. That was not how 600 years of expansion worked. That was not the kind of decision that kept a fleet commander alive long enough to grow old. You gathered more information. Zethrak 5 ordered the fleet to hold position. He ordered 6 destroyer-class ships to break formation and move in a wide arc around the planet. Not aggressive, not yet, just repositioning, getting angles, getting a look at Herald of Ruin from different approach vectors so that his sensor officers could build a complete picture of what they were actually dealing with. It was a standard intelligence maneuver. They had done it 1,000 times. Herald of Ruin tracked all 6 destroyers simultaneously. Its targeting systems updated in real time, maintaining locks on all 6 while also maintaining locks on the rest of the fleet. Not defensive locks, not warning locks, kill locks. The humans had a phrase for this in the trade tongue translation databases. Zethrak 5 was told by his linguistics officer, who had pulled it up because she had nothing else useful to offer. The phrase was, "I can see you." And the implication of the phrase, the weight that native speakers put into it, was not about vision. It was about the specific discomfort of being watched by something that was better at watching than you were at hiding. Zethrak 5 found this piece of cultural trivia unhelpful. He went back to the files, 90 years of FTL travel. That was what the Vorkai knew. That was what the observation log said. The first human FTL jump had been recorded by a Vorkai long-range probe in 2157 by their calendar. Messy jump. Huge energy spike, the kind of signature you got from a species that had figured out the math but hadn't figured out the efficiency. Like watching something learn to walk by falling forward very fast, the Vorkai had logged it. Updated the file. Category 3, recently mobile. Observed, no intervention required. What the files did not say, what no file said, because no one had been looking for it, was what the humans had been doing in the 90 years since. Sensor Officer Vethis was very good at her job. While Zethrak 5 read files, she was building a picture from every scrap of data the fleet's combined sensor array could pull. The energy signature, the hull configuration, the targeting system behavior, the communications encryption, which she had been trying to crack for 20 minutes, and which was, she reported in a tone of flat professional bewilderment, unlike any encryption architecture she had ever encountered. Not stronger than Vorkai encryption, not even the same category of thing. It was as if someone had looked at the concept of encryption and then decided to approach the underlying problem from a completely different direction, a direction that her tools were not built to address because no one had ever thought to build in that direction. They didn't improve on what we know, Vethis said, when she brought her report to Zethrak 5. They went somewhere else entirely. Explain that. Our encryption systems are like, she paused. Vethis was not a metaphor person. This pause cost her something. Like a very complex lock. Anyone smart enough can pick a lock if they have enough time. What the humans have built is not a lock. I don't have a word for what it is. My tools see it and don't know what question to ask. Zethrak 5 looked at her. Are you telling me their communications are unbreakable? I'm telling you I currently have no method of approach. Whether that changes with time, I cannot say. She met his eyes. What I can say is that this system did not exist in any form 90 years ago, 60 years ago. Based on the architecture, it is at minimum 40 years old, possibly older, 40 years. The observation window, the period during which the Vorkai watched, logged, assessed, and concluded. No threat, Category 3, ignore. 40 years during which the humans had apparently done something else entirely. Zethrak 5 called his senior staff together. The bridge was not large enough for genuine privacy, but his officers understood how to arrange themselves so that the conversation had the shape of privacy, and that was sufficient. He laid out what they knew, the ship, the energy signature, the targeting system, the encryption, the fact that no intelligence source, Vorkai or otherwise, had any record of this vessel's existence before today. Weapons Chief Gorik said, "We attack, overwhelm, 200 ships against 1. Even accounting for unknown technology, the numbers hold." "You believe that," said Zethrak 5. It was not a question. He was learning the trick of it. Gorik's jaw tightened. "I believe in numbers. The number I keep returning to," said Zethrak 5, is 40 years. If they built that ship. He gestured toward the view screen, toward the long dark silhouette of the Herald of Ruin, hanging above the blue-green world. In 40 years, while we watched and saw nothing, What else did they build that we also saw nothing of? The bridge was quiet. It was Vethis who said it. She said it the way she said everything, flat, precise, empty of drama, as if she were reading a sensor report. The asteroid belt, she said. We came for the minerals. But the asteroid belt is also where long-range sensor readings are most degraded. Natural interference from density and rotation. It is the one place in this system where our observation coverage has consistent blind spots. Everyone looked at the asteroid belt. It sat there, as asteroid belts did, being a dense band of rocks and dust and old solar debris. Unremarkable, expected. Logged 40 years ago as mineral-rich and strategically unimportant except as a resource target. Scan it, said Zathrak 5. I have been, said Vethis. Since we arrived, the interference is significant. Push through it. Use the full array. I want everything. Vethis went back to her station. Her hands moved. The fleet's sensor array, the combined eyes of 400 ships, turned toward the asteroid. Belt and pushed. The interference was significant. But 400 ships pushed hard. The picture that came back was not the picture of an asteroid belt. An asteroid belt had rocks. This had rocks. But between the rocks, attached to the rocks, hiding behind and underneath and inside the rocks, were structures, stations, platforms, docking bays cut into the interior of planetesimals large enough to hold them. Power conduits running between asteroids like the nervous system of something enormous. Something that had grown slowly in the dark over a very long time. Fed by the natural camouflage of dust and interference and the comfortable assumption that nothing interesting was happening here. How many ships? Zethrik 5 asked. Vethis's voice was steady. It cost her a great deal to keep it that way. Docking signatures consistent with, she stopped, started again, consistent with several hundred vessels, possibly more. The interference makes precise counting impossible. She paused. But Commander, the power signatures from the stations, the combined output, she put the number on the screen. Gorak, who said everything not as a question, said, that can't be right. It is consistent across all sensor platforms, said Vethis. The number on the screen was not the power output of a young species with 90 years of FTL travel. It was not the power output of a Category 3 civilization. It was not the power output of anything that the known galaxy's filing system had a Category 4. It was the power output of something that had been quietly, patiently, and very deliberately building for a very long time, in the one place no one thought to look carefully. Zethrak 5 stood at the screen for a long moment. Then the communication channel opened. They had not opened it. It opened itself. Broke through their carrier encryption the way a hand breaks through paper. Not because it was powerful, but because the paper had never been designed to stop a hand. Captain Elias Vance's voice again, still unhurried. Commander, I'm going to ask one more time. The channel carried something in the background. Quiet, mechanical, the sound of many things waking up. We have been very patient, said the voice, for a long time. You understand patience, I think. Your expansion program took 600 years. Ours took 90. A pause. That's the difference between us, Commander. You expanded for 600 years because you could, and because nothing stopped you. We built for 90 years because we knew something was coming, and we intended to be ready when it arrived. Another pause. Shorter. We are ready. Zethrik 5 looked at his navigation officer. Reverse approach vector, he said. Full fleet. Maximum safe speed. This time, nobody argued. The news moved faster than the Vorkai fleet did. This was not unusual, strictly speaking. Information always moved faster than ships. But what was unusual was the way the news moved. Not through official channels. Not through the careful diplomatic networks that connected the great powers of the known galaxy. But through the informal, unkillable web of ship captains and merchant runners and station gossips who formed the galaxy's real nervous system. A Tarathi cargo hauler had been running dark at the edge of the Sol system, waiting for the Vorkai extraction to complete so that the resupply lane would be clear. The hauler's captain was a practical creature who had survived 40 years in deep space by paying attention to everything. And talking about most of it, she had watched the entire sequence on her long-range sensors, the approach, the halt. Herald of Ruin. Sitting alone in planetary orbit like a challenge laid flat on a table, the fleet's retreat, she filed a report to her company. The company's communications network touched 11 other networks. By the time the Vorkai fleet had crossed back to the edge of the system, the story was already at Kethali Prime. By the time Zethrak 5 reached the nearest Vorkai resupply station to file his own report, he discovered that his high command already knew something had happened. They did not know what, exactly. They knew the fleet had withdrawn. They knew it had involved a human vessel. They knew the withdrawal had been voluntary. The last part was the one that did the most damage. In 600 years of expansion, the Vorkai fleet had never voluntarily withdrawn from an approach. Never. The record was clean. You could search it and find routes. Yes, in the early centuries, before the fleet was what it was, you could find tactical repositioning. You could find strategic retreats ordered from high command for reasons that had nothing to do with enemy action. You could not find a fleet of 400 ships turning around because a single vessel asked them to. High command wanted answers. Zethrak 5 gave them everything. The sensor data, Vethus's analysis, the recording of Captain Vance's communication, the asteroid belt scan and its impossible numbers. He gave them the images of the Herald of Ruin and its energy signature sitting on the screen next to the Cathali Hegemony's flagship for comparison. Because that comparison made the point faster than words. High command went very quiet, not the operational quiet of a fleet bridge, the deep, political quiet of people reassessing a fundamental assumption. The Vorkai Expansion Council had 47 members. They had been governing an unbroken expansion program for 300 years. They were not, as individuals or as a body, prone to uncertainty. Uncertainty was what other species felt. The Vorkai had protocols. The Vorkai had databases. The Vorkai had 6 centuries of experience telling them exactly what each category of species was capable of, and exactly how long it would take to assimilate them. The humans were Category 3. Except they were sitting on a power output that Category 3 didn't reach. Except they had built a ship that Category 7 barely reached. Except their encryption architecture didn't fit the taxonomy. Except their military installations had been invisible for 40 years to the galaxy's most advanced passive observation network. The Council began the process of requesting intelligence from every other major power that had contact with human space. The Tarathi Trade Consortium, the Cathali Hegemony, the Pelari Commonwealth, all of them had observation posts near human territory. All of them had filed regular reports for the last several decades. All of those reports said, more or less, the same thing. Category 3, young, aggressive, technologically adolescent, statistically irrelevant. All of them were now being re-examined by analysts who were, for the first time, asking different questions. Not how dangerous are the humans now, but what were we not looking at? The Cathali Hegemony found something in their archived observation data from 11 years back. A very faint energy fluctuation in the outer Sol system that had been logged as a possible stellar anomaly, and then ignored. When a Cathali analyst ran the signature through the new comparison data from the Vorkai sensor records, the match came back at 93% probability. Not a stellar anomaly, a jump signature. A very clean, very quiet jump signature from something large, entering and leaving the Sol system at a range so extreme and with a profile so minimal that it had blended into background noise. They had been practicing long-range jumps. 11 years ago, minimum. The Cathali Senior Intelligence Officer, a being who had spent 60 years in the business of knowing things, and had reached the point in that career where very little surprised her, looked at the match result for a long time. Then she called her director. Then her director called the council. Then the Cathali Diplomatic Service drafted 3 separate urgent communiques to 3 separate parties and debated for 6 hours which one to send first. They sent the one to the humans first. The response came back in 4 standard hours, which was fast. Fast enough that the Cathali communication officer who received it stood up from his desk and went to get his director before reading the contents, because a 4-hour response to a diplomatic inquiry crossing 12 light years implied either that the humans had a relay network of a scale no one knew about, or that they had been expecting the inquiry. The message was brief, polite, warm, even, in the specific way that warmth functions as a performance of confidence. We appreciate the Cathali Hegemony's communication and welcome this opportunity for direct dialogue. We have been hoping to have this conversation for some time. We suggest a neutral meeting point and propose the Verath station at coordinates attached. We are prepared to send representatives within 48 standard hours. We also note with respect that the Vorkai fleet has stopped at the edge of our system. We wish to be transparent. They are welcome to leave. We have no hostile intent toward the Vorkai or toward anyone. We are simply no longer willing to be ignored. The Cathali director read this message twice. Then she made the observation that would be repeated in various forms across the next several weeks by every senior official of every major power who read it. They said, no longer willing. She said not. No longer able. They chose this. It meant something. It meant the humans had been able to do this for some time and had decided, for reasons of their own, to wait, to let the 40 years run, to let the observation logs fill with reassuring data, to let the galaxy's powers grow comfortable and certain and convinced of what the humans were, and then to choose the moment. The Herald of Ruin had not appeared because the Vorkai triggered it. The Vorkai approach had been the excuse, not the cause. This had been planned. This had been patient and long and deliberate in a way that the known galaxy's great powers were only now, slowly, beginning to process. Vareth Station was neutral ground. It was a commercial hub controlled by the Pelari Commonwealth, which had no standing military and a long history of hosting negotiations between parties who did. It was 3 jumps from Sol and 2 from Cathali Prime and 4 from the edge of Vorkai space, and it had the best communications infrastructure in the sector. Because the Pelhari had spent 2 centuries building it for exactly this kind of purpose, the humans arrived in one ship, not the Herald of Ruin. A smaller vessel, sleek, dark, unmarked except for the United Nations Space Navy identifier on its hull. It docked precisely on time. Its delegation walked off the boarding ramp and into the station's reception bay without security detail, without visible weapons, wearing the dark uniforms of the human diplomatic corps. 3 humans, 2 women, 1 man. The man in the center was tall and somewhere in his 50s, with the particular kind of stillness that came from having spent a long time in space. His name was Ambassador Dae-Jung Park. He had been the human diplomatic representative to the Pelari Commonwealth for 12 years, during which time his official title and position had been logged, observed, and assessed by 6 different intelligence agencies as low priority, minor trade liaison. He sat down at the table across from representatives of the Cathali Hegemony, the Pelhari Commonwealth, and the Turathi Trade Consortium, and he smiled the way people smiled when they had been waiting for a meeting for a very long time. "Thank you for coming," he said, in perfect trade tongue with a Cathali secondary dialect accent that he had, evidently, taken the time to learn. "We have a great deal to discuss." Across the table, the Cathali lead negotiator, a woman who had handled 30 years of galactic diplomacy and whose composure was, by professional reputation, essentially unshakable, found that her primary emotion was not fear, not anger, not suspicion, it was curiosity. Because the humans had spent 40 years being watched, and had spent those same 40 years watching back, and they had arrived at this table knowing things about the attending delegations, about their organizations, about the political pressures and internal debates that had preceded this meeting, that no Category 3 civilization in any historical record had ever known about the parties they were about to negotiate with. They were not adolescent. They had never been adolescent. They had been young, yes, but there was a very large difference between young and uninformed. And the humans appeared to have understood that difference clearly and used it expertly for the entire duration of their observation period. The ambassador opened a briefcase. He removed 4 documents. He passed one to each delegation. "These are our proposals," he said. "Take as much time as you need. We're not in a hurry." The Cathali negotiator opened her document. She read the first page. Then she turned to the second page. Then she looked up at Ambassador Park with an expression that her staff, who had worked with her for years, had never seen on her face before. The Herald of Ruin was still sitting in orbit above Earth. Its energy signature had dropped to standby levels, patient, quiet. Out at the edge of the Sol system, the Vorkai fleet sat at its holding position, waiting for orders that High Command had not yet decided how to give. Inside the asteroid belt, in the deep quiet of carved-out rock and powered-down systems, several hundred ships waited in the dark. The galaxy was adjusting, not violently, not yet. Just adjusting. The way a room adjusts when someone walks in who is larger than you expected and sits down in the chair you thought was yours. The documents were 47 pages long. Ambassador Park had apologized for the length during the handover, in the pleasant, meaningless way that people apologize for things they are not sorry about. The Cathali negotiator, her name was Sarah Voss, and she had spent 30 years not being surprised by anything, had taken the document and begun reading with the professional calm of someone who had seen most of what the galaxy produced and expected this to fall within known parameters. It did not fall within known parameters. By page 6 she had asked her aide to bring coffee, which she had never done in a negotiation before, because in a negotiation you did not signal that you needed something. By page 12 she had asked her second aide to leave the room and close the door, which she had also never done, because closed doors in negotiations implied that what was being discussed was dangerous enough to require containment. By page 20, she set the document down and looked at Ambassador Park for a long time without speaking. Park waited. He had a talent for waiting that she was beginning to recognize as deliberate. The talent of someone who had learned that most of the work in a negotiation happened in silences, and that the person who was comfortable in silence held most of the power. This, she said finally, tapping the document, proposes a complete restructuring of the Galactic Compact's security framework. Yes, said Park. It proposes human involvement in joint defense councils, human access to Cathali strategic communication networks, human representation in the resource allocation framework. She paused. It also proposes a mutual non-aggression architecture between human space and all current compact signatories that would effectively end the category system as it applies to humanity. We prefer not to be categorized, said Park. The category system exists for good reasons. The category system exists to tell powerful species which weaker species they can afford to ignore, said Park. His voice was pleasant. We understand the reasons. We are proposing an alternative. Sarah Voss looked at him. He met her eyes. He was not aggressive. He was not threatening. He was something she found considerably more unsettling. Completely, serenely certain. And if we decline, she asked. Then you decline, said Park. We have no intent to coerce anyone at this table. We have made our position clear. And the Herald of Ruin. In planetary orbit is our position made visible, but it is not a threat. It is information. You needed accurate information about what we are before this conversation could happen honestly. The ship provides that. It provides a considerable amount of that, said the Tarathi representative, who had been quiet until now. His name was Councilman Vrethog, and he controlled trade routes that touched 20% of the known galaxy's commercial traffic. He had read the document faster than Sarah Voss, because he read everything fast and remembered most of it, and he had arrived at page 23 before she had. And page 23 was the trade proposal. The trade proposal was extraordinary, not aggressive, not exploitative. Thoughtful, in a way that implied the humans had spent considerable time studying Tarathi economic structure. It offered things the Tarathi wanted, and asked for things that the Tarathi could provide, and the balance of the exchange was, if you ran the numbers, which Vrethog had been running in his head since page 23, genuinely fair. The humans were proposing a fair deal. In Vrethog's experience, a party that held a strong hand and proposed a fair deal was either very naive or had thought further ahead than you had. The humans were not naive. That had been established. Your intelligence on our trade network, he said. How current is it? The data in the proposal is as of 3 months ago, said Park. We update continuously. Vrethog looked at him. Our network has 16,000 nodes across 400 star systems. We have intelligence personnel dedicated to mapping it, who have worked on nothing else for 20 years, and still consider their data incomplete. We have been attentive, said Park. For how long? Park's expression shifted slightly, not to discomfort, to something more like amusement, the internal kind, since about 40 years after we achieved FTL. Vrethog did the math. That was roughly 50 years of continuous intelligence collection on Tarathi commercial infrastructure alone, on top of whatever they had been doing regarding military structures, political networks, and the 100 other things the documents referenced. He thought about the humans. He thought about them the way he thought about economic forces. Not morally, not emotionally, but in terms of scale and direction and what they implied about the future. The humans had looked at the galaxy, early in their spacefaring life, and understood something that the older species had apparently forgotten about themselves. They had understood that the galaxy was organized around power, and that power was built, not found. And they had looked at the powerful species and their categories and their comfortable certainties, and decided, as a species-level choice, to spend the next several decades becoming something those categories didn't have a slot for. This required extraordinary patience. It also required extraordinary consensus. Vrethog knew something about how difficult it was to maintain institutional focus across decades. His own organization had 500 years of history, and still struggled with strategic continuity across leadership generations. For a species as young as the humans, with their notoriously contentious internal politics, to have maintained a coherent, secret, long-term military and intelligence buildup across multiple governmental administrations. How? He asked. It was not the most diplomatic question he had ever asked, but it was the most genuine. How did you maintain program continuity for this long? Politically, your governments change. Your public disagreements are. He searched for a diplomatic term, well documented. Park smiled. The real one, slightly crooked, slightly tired. We argued about almost everything else, he said. Space defense was the one thing we agreed on. Every administration, every faction, The external threat was motivating. He didn't name the threat. He didn't need to. The Vorkai had been on approach vectors toward human space 4 times in the last 60 years. The humans had watched each approach and withdrawn each time before contact, because the time had not been right. The fleet in the asteroid belt had been big enough for 30 years. Herald of Ruin had been completed 22 years ago. They had waited for the right approach. This one. The one where the full fleet came, with extraction equipment, with the clear intention of beginning a process that would not stop at the asteroid belt. The one where refusing to respond was no longer a viable option. They had not wanted to show their hand early. A partial reveal would have triggered a response that might have forced a conflict. A complete reveal, at the right moment, with the right witnesses, with documentation and proposals already prepared, turned a military moment into a diplomatic one. The Herald of Ruin had fired nothing it had not needed to. Sarah Voss picked up the document again. She turned to the section on the Vorkai, page 31. The human proposal regarding the Vorkai was not punitive, it was not triumphant, it was again measured. It proposed a framework for the Vorkai's managed withdrawal from their current expansion trajectory, with face-saving structures built in, with economic alternatives offered, with the whole thing constructed in a way that allowed the Vorkai to walk back from their position without looking like they had been defeated. They'll never accept this, said Sarah Voss. Some won't, said Park. Some will, the ones who run the numbers. He paused. We have been in contact with certain Vorkai Council members for the last 6 years through intermediaries. The conversations have been private, but productive. The table was quiet. 6 years of private, intermediary-based, back-channel communication with members of the Vorkai Expansion Council, while the Vorkai's fleet was assembling for an extraction run on human space, while High Command was preparing orders, while everything official said the humans were Category 3 and irrelevant. You were negotiating with them while they were planning to take your asteroid belt, said Vreth Og. Negotiation is more effective before a conflict than after, said Park. After a conflict, one side has lost something. That makes them harder to reason with. We preferred to create a situation where no one had to lose anything. He said it the way you said something that was true and simple, and that you had thought about for a very long time. The Pelari representative, who had been the quietest of the three, a small, careful being named Ith Sala, who ran the Commonwealth's diplomatic infrastructure, and whose skill was in creating spaces where difficult conversations could happen, set down her copy of the document and looked at the human ambassador with an expression of pure professional appreciation. You are not asking for power, she said. You are asking for a seat. We are asking for accurate representation, said Park. We have been here for a while. We are part of this galaxy. We would like to be treated as such. He looked around the table. We understand this is a significant adjustment. We have tried to make the adjustment as manageable as possible. The documents are detailed because we wanted to give you everything you needed to make decisions rather than asking for trust on faith. He paused. We know we haven't earned that trust yet. We are proposing a structure by which we can earn it over time. Sarah Voss looked at the document in her hands, 47 pages, specific, careful, evidently developed over years by people who understood the organizations they were negotiating with better than most of those organizations understood themselves. She had spent 30 years in diplomacy. She had seen a lot of opening positions. She had never seen one quite like this, a position backed by force that was specifically designed to avoid using force, built with enough detail to make good faith legible, offered with enough humility to make it politically receivable. It was, she thought, extremely well done, she said. We'll need time to review this in full and consult with our respective principals. Of course, said Park. We suggest 48 standard hours for initial review. We are not in a hurry. He paused. We haven't been in a hurry for 90 years. We can manage another 48 hours. Outside in the station's docking bay, the small human vessel sat quietly at its berth. Its crew of 12 moved around it doing maintenance checks, with the easy unhurry of people who had been told to expect a wait and were fine with that. 3-star systems away. Herald of Ruin held its orbit. Standby mode, patient. In the asteroid belt in the dark, the fleet waited. The galaxy was reading a 47-page document and beginning, slowly, to understand that the map it had been using was wrong. Not in its geography, but in where it had placed the humans on it. Not at the edge, not in the margins, not in the category marked adolescent, irrelevant, observe and ignore. Somewhere else entirely. Somewhere they had put themselves, carefully and quietly, over 90 years of very deliberate work. The Vorkai High Command met for 9 hours. This was unusual. High Command meetings were efficient by design. Every agenda item had a time allocation. Every decision had a pre-built framework, and the entire culture of the organization was structured around the principle that extended deliberation was a sign of failure to prepare. 9 hours was not extended deliberation. 9 hours was something you did not have a category for. Fleet Commander Zethrak V attended via secured communication link from the resupply station where his fleet was still holding position at the edge of human space. He presented his data. He answered questions. There were a great many questions. He answered them carefully, consistently, and without embellishment, because he understood that embellishment was no longer necessary. The facts, stated plainly, were already beyond what anyone in that room had frameworks to process. Afterward, the council debated. He was not party to the debate. He sat in a small room at the resupply station and drank the Vorkai equivalent of tea and waited, which was something he was not naturally good at and had to work at consciously. His communication officer knocked on the door and told him that Sensor Officer Vethis was asking to speak with him. He let her in. She sat down across from him with the manner of someone who had not slept and was working through something methodically. The humans have been in contact with certain members of our council, she said. He had not told her this. The information had come out during the council session, which was supposed to be internal. He looked at her. How do you know that? Because the math doesn't work otherwise, she said. The documents they presented at Vareth Station, the Cathali negotiators' aide filed a partial summary through diplomatic channels within 6 hours of the meeting. The summary mentions council-specific structural proposals, proposals you cannot draft without detailed knowledge of our internal governance. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from passive observation. She paused. Someone talked to them for a long time. Zethrak V looked at his tea. The council is aware, he said. What will they do about it? He was quiet for a moment. What would they do about it? It was a good question. The easy answer, the emotional answer, the answer that 600 years of expansion culture produced almost automatically, was punishment. You found the members who had communicated with the humans. You removed them from positions of authority. You treated the thing as a breach and responded to it as a breach, but the humans had been right, and the council members who had spoken with them had, presumably, concluded that the humans were right, and had been trying in their quiet way to prepare the council for a reality that the official data was not showing them. And the humans had not, so far, been threatening. They had been, he kept returning to this word, patient, and they had built a position that was strong enough to be threatening, and had chosen not to use it that way. The Vorkai expansion program had hit something. Not a wall, you hit a wall and it stopped you. This was different. This was something that had looked at the wall you were building and built a larger, quieter one of its own, and had put it exactly where your expansion program was going to eventually arrive, and was now standing next to it saying, "We could talk about this." "I don't know what they'll do," he said. Vethis nodded. It was not a satisfying answer. It was an honest one, and she recognized the difference. "The power output from the asteroid belt," she said. "If they brought that fleet into the open, we would lose," he said, not dramatically. Just as a fact, assessed and filed. She was quiet. "The humans know we would lose," he said. "That's why they didn't bring the fleet into the open. They know that a fight they win is worse for them than a negotiation they win. Because a fight would require them to hold territory, and holding territory requires sustained hostility, and they have made a decision, as a species apparently, which is not easy, that they do not want to be at war with everyone for the next several hundred years." Vethis thought about this. "They want to be part of the compact," she said. "They want to be what they are," he said, "which is a species that built, in 90 years, what we built in 600. And they want the galaxy to know that and to deal with them accordingly." He looked at his cup. The diplomatic framing, the proposals, the careful face-saving structures for the Vorkai, those are not weakness, those are strategy. They have decided that integration is better than isolation, and they have structured their reveal to make integration politically viable. He paused. "It's very well done." Vethis looked at him. "You admire them." He thought about it. "I recognize the craft," he said. "I have spent my career doing this, reading situations, moving pieces, building positions. What they have done is the same work, at a larger scale, over a longer time with better results." He put down the cup. "Yes, I admire the craft." The reply from High Command came 2 hours later. The Vorkai would engage with the human proposals. Formally and officially, the fleet would withdraw from Sol-adjacent Sector 7. The resource extraction operations were suspended pending diplomatic review. The 3 council members who had been in back-channel contact with human representatives were placed on administrative review, not punished. Reviewed, which was a very Vorkai way of acknowledging that the situation was complicated. The message to the human delegation was 1 paragraph, written in the careful, neutral trade tongue that Vorkai official communication used for external parties. It acknowledged the meeting at Vareth Station. It expressed a readiness to receive the human proposals through formal channels. It said nothing about the Herald of Ruin, or the asteroid belt, or the 47-page document, because acknowledging those things directly would have required a different kind of language than High Command was currently prepared to use. But it was a reply, an official, authenticated reply through proper channels, from the Vorkai Expansion Council to the United Nations Space Navy Diplomatic Delegation. The first one in 90 years of attempted communication. At Vareth Station, Ambassador Park read the message and did not change his expression. He passed it to his senior aide, who read it and permitted herself a small private exhale that lasted about half a second and then was gone. Park wrote a reply. It was polite and warm and specific in the ways that mattered. He sent it. Then he went to the small common room at the back of the human vessel and made himself a cup of coffee. Real coffee. Beans grown in a pressurized agricultural module on a station in the outer Sol system, which was one of the small amenities the diplomatic corps had decided was worth the logistics, and he stood at the small porthole and looked at the stars. He had been 7 years old when the Vorkai fleet had made its first recorded approach toward the Sol system. He had been 16 when the second approach happened. He had been 23 when the third approach happened, and he had been a student at the International Diplomatic Institute. And his professor had assigned the approach as a case study in asymmetric power dynamics, and Park had written a paper arguing that the standard response framework, observe, protest, withdraw, was strategically unsustainable long-term. He had received a very good grade, his professor had written in the margin. Interesting argument. Impractical given current resource and technology limitations. He sipped his coffee. The fourth approach had been this one. He had been 53, and for 20 years he had been part of a program that most of the humans who knew about it called, informally, the long game, not because anyone had officially named it that, but because what else do you call a 90-year, multi-generational, bipartisan, species-level decision to refuse to be what the galaxy expected you to be? The long game was not a secret exactly. There had been public debates. There had been funding discussions in open legislative sessions. There had been academics who published papers about it, and journalists who wrote about it, and citizens who had opinions about it. The galaxy's observation networks had recorded all of this. What the observation networks had not done was pay enough attention to understand what they were looking at, because paying attention requires that you believe what you are looking at might matter. And the galaxy had decided, at Category 3, that the humans did not yet matter enough for that level of attention. This was the gap the long game had slid through. Not deception, exactly. The information was there. The conclusions drawn from it were wrong. And they were wrong because the observers were not trying hard enough. And they were not trying hard enough because they had a category that told them not to bother. Categories were comfortable. They organized things. They let you focus your attention on what was important and let the unimportant fade to background. The humans had been background, right up until they weren't. 3 weeks after the Vareth Station meeting, the Cathali hegemony signed a preliminary agreement on joint research cooperation with the human delegation. It was small, 3 research stations, a shared communication protocol, a framework for future military coordination in defined scenarios. But it was the first formal agreement between humanity and a Category 8 power. And when it was announced, the diplomatic networks lit up with analysis and commentary, and a quiet, uncomfortable reassessment of positions that had seemed stable a month ago. The Tarathi Trade Consortium signed a commercial framework agreement 2 weeks after that. Vrethov Og had gone back to his principles with the human proposal, and had spent a week arguing for it, not because he particularly liked the humans, but because the trade analysis was sound and the alternative, treating the humans as adversaries, was a calculation that got worse with every piece of data he ran. The Pelari Commonwealth, which had been neutral for centuries by design, issued a statement welcoming the new developments and offering Vareth Station as a permanent diplomatic hub for ongoing negotiations. Ith Sala, who had hosted the first meeting, was appointed as the Commonwealth's permanent liaison to the new human diplomatic mission. She sent a personal communication to Ambassador Park on the day of her appointment. It said simply, I have been doing this work for a long time. I have never seen a first contact go like this. I wanted to tell you that. Park wrote back, neither have we. We planned for it for 90 years and it was still strange when it happened. Thank you for the space you created at Verath. It mattered. Herald of Ruin. Left Earth's orbit 6 weeks after its appearance. It did not go far. It moved to the L2 point of the Sol system, a stable gravitational position, visible to any observer, making no threatening moves, simply present in the way that a fact was present. The fleet in the asteroid belt remained in the asteroid belt. The Vorkai knew it was there. The Cathali knew it was there. Everyone who needed to know knew. But knowing was different from seeing, and for now, the humans had decided that known but unseen was the right configuration. The fleet was not a weapon. It was a condition of negotiation, the same way the Herald of Ruin's visible presence was a condition of negotiation. Context, not threat. In the Sol system, in the cities on the blue-green world, people went about their lives. Most of them knew in outline what had happened. The news had covered the appearance of the Herald of Ruin, the Vorkai fleet's withdrawal, the Verath station meeting. There were parades in some cities and quiet in others. And in the cities where the families of the Long Games builders lived, there were small private gatherings where people who had spent decades working on something that the public could only partially know about sat in each other's living rooms and said nothing much and meant a great deal. The generation that had started the long game was mostly gone. The generation that had finished it was getting old. The generation that would live in the world it created was young, and some of them were watching the Herald of Ruin's telemetry feed on their screens and feeling the particular sensation of living inside a history that had not finished deciding what it was. Zethrak 5 filed his final report from Sol-adjacent Sector 7 and received his new assignment, a quieter posting, further from human space, in a sector where the expansion program was still running on the old assumptions. He accepted the assignment without comment. Before he left the resupply station, he sat down at his desk and wrote a private communication, not official, not logged, to an address that had been provided to him, through the careful back channels that were now, slowly, becoming less necessary, by someone in the human diplomatic service who had thought it might be useful. It was a short communication. He was not a long communication person. It said, I have read the proposals. The architecture is sound. I believe the Vorkai will eventually sign the non-aggression framework. It may take time. We have a council culture that moves slowly when it is asked to move away from certainty. But the math is clear and we follow the math. I did not expect this outcome. I want to say that directly. In 600 years, we have not encountered a species that surprised us this completely. I believe it is important to say so when it is true. He sent it. He did not know if he would receive a reply. He thought he probably would. The humans were, among other things, very good at correspondence, and they tended to respond to honesty with honesty, which was a quality he had not expected and found, at this late stage of his career, genuinely refreshing. He picked up his bags and went to the docking bay. Behind him, at the edge of the Sol system, the Herald of Ruin held its position at L2 and watched the dark with patient, quiet, unhurried attention. The way things watched when they had been watching for a very long time and intended to keep watching for a very long time more. The galaxy turned. It turned the way it always had, indifferent to the small dramas of the species living on its warm inner edge. Stars burned, planets orbited. The vast impersonal machinery of physics proceeded without comment. But the category files were being updated. In 6 different intelligence databases across 4 major powers, the updates were careful, precise, and written with the specific care of professionals who had learned, recently, and in some detail, that their previous assessments had been wrong. The new category didn't have a number yet. The taxonomy hadn't caught up. What it had was a note, flagged for review, that said, reevaluate all prior data. Initial classification was based on incomplete observation. This species has been present in the galactic community for longer than recorded. They were never adolescent. They were patient. And below that, added by an analyst who had apparently felt strongly enough to break the standard format of a dry intelligence file. Do not ignore their communications. They have been trying to have this conversation for 90 years. They are very good at waiting. They are better at talking. They prefer talking. Pay attention to that.